I started off singing in churches and things like that, and I got to hearing, Roy Acuff and all of them on the Grand Ole Opry.
George Jones was a legendary country singer who was not afraid to speak his mind. But when it came to these five musical rivals, the legendary singer's dislike knew no bounds. But who were the five artists that George Jones loathed most? And what were the sources of their infamous rivalries? Join us to find out who's at the top. Number 5, Kenny Chesney. Throughout the long and colorful history of country music, very few people earned as much love and respect as George Jones. Fondly called the Possum by his fans around the world, George had a voice that could touch the soul and a deep love for the pure, simple heart of country music. No matter what struggles life threw his way, George always held on tightly to what he believed made country music special: honesty, raw emotions, and a kind of simple beauty that didn't need anything fancy. As time passed, country music slowly started to change. New singers appeared and fresh sounds began to mix into the old style. One of these new stars was Kenny Chesney, a talented young man from East Tennessee. Kenny became popular with his easygoing, beach-inspired country songs. People loved his relaxed style and cheerful tunes, but no matter how many fans Kenny gained, there was one person he could never win over: George Jones. George didn't dislike Kenny's music because he thought Kenny wasn't talented. In fact, George respected the young singer as a person. But to George, country music had a certain soul to it, and it was meant to be more than just fun songs and flashy shows. George believed country music should be real and meaningful, full of feelings that came straight from the heart. He felt that Kenny's light, cheerful songs about beaches, boats, and good times strayed too far from the honest, tear-in-your-beer songs that made country music what it was. Even though Kenny Chesney grew up surrounded by old country music, with George Jones as one of his childhood favorites, his career would take a different path. As a boy in East Tennessee, Kenny spent a lot of time in his grandmother's kitchen, listening to George's songs. When his stepfather went off to serve in Vietnam, George's music brought young Kenny comfort and made him feel a little less alone in a difficult time. Kenny chased his dream of becoming a country singer while keeping those childhood memories close. In 1994, he released his first album, In My Wildest Dreams. Even though it didn't sell much, it was the start of something big. Kenny's early music featured classic country sounds, using fiddles and steel guitars, and his soft, Tennessee twang filled every song. When his second album, All I Need to Know, came out in 1995, Kenny's name began to grow in country circles. Songs like Fall in Love and Grandpa Told Me So became favorites on country radio. While his love for traditional country was still clear, Kenny was also adding his own style, blending country with pop and easy, breezy songs that made listeners feel like they were on vacation. George Jones watched Kenny rise to fame with mixed feelings. While he admired the young man's talent and remembered his early country roots, George couldn't shake the feeling that something important was being lost. The heartfelt, sorrowful, and honest country music he loved so much seemed to be fading as singers like Kenny brought more party songs and beach-themed tunes into the spotlight. Though George never personally disliked Kenny, in fact, they shared some kind moments, he remained unimpressed by Kenny's musical direction. As Kenny's success soared, he moved even further from the old sounds George cherished. In 2002, Kenny fully embraced his beach country image with the album No Shoes, No Shirt, No Problems. The album was a huge hit with younger audiences. Its songs spoke of sunshine, young love, and carefree days. Songs like Young, The Good Stuff, and Big Star climbed to the top of the charts, and Kenny found himself headlining huge concerts and taking home major awards. To George, this growing success showed just how much country music was changing, and not in a way he liked. George preferred country music that sang about heartbreak, family, faith, simple joys, and real struggles. He believed country music should be unpolished and deeply personal, with a touch of sadness that made it true. In George's eyes, Kenny's cheerful, good-time songs missed those qualities. But the most surprising part of their story was the personal connection they shared. Despite their different ideas about music, in the early years of Kenny's career, George Jones went out of his way to offer the young singer support. Kenny even got the chance to open for George at several concerts. These moments meant the world to Kenny, who deeply admired the country legend. One of the memories Kenny would never forget was the night in Beaumont, Texas, when George and his wife Nancy invited him to fly with them on their private jet back to Nashville. For a small-town boy just starting out in the music world, riding beside a country legend on a private plane felt like a dream come true. Kenny Chesney looked up to George not only as a musical hero, but as a kind and generous person. Even though George didn't enjoy Kenny's shift toward beach country songs, he continued to offer kindness and encouragement. To Kenny, George was a mentor and almost a father figure, someone who showed him what it meant to be both a great artist and a good human being. When George Jones passed away, Kenny mourned deeply. He thought back to all the times George had been kind to him, offering advice, support, and friendship. The sound of George's voice in his grandmother's kitchen and that unforgettable private jet ride stayed with him forever. Even though their musical styles had grown apart, the bond between them remained strong. George Jones may never have fully accepted Kenny Chesney's new style of country music, but he still cared about the man behind the songs. George's disappointment wasn't aimed only at Kenny, but at the way the whole country music industry seemed to be drifting away from its roots. Watching the genre he loved take on so many new shapes was a painful thing for him. They both followed different paths in the ways OT music. But who do you think will make this list next? And what would be George Jones's reason for disliking this fellow artist? Let's dive into it. Number 4, Toby Keith. Toby Keith was bold and fearless. He represented a newer kind of country artist. He was not afraid to say exactly what he thought, and his image was built around being strong, tough, and outspoken. His songs were about standing tall, being proud, and never backing down. Toby was confident and didn't feel the need to explain his attitude to anyone. While a lot of people liked this about him, George Jones didn't. George was not a fan of Toby's tough and boastful attitude. To George, country music should express feelings like sadness, love, regrets, and heartbreak. He thought Toby's songs were too focused on being tough, missing the soft, honest emotions that made classic country music special. George liked the old country songs because they were gentle, emotional, and told stories about real life without showing off. People close to them noticed the tension between the two. Someone who had worked in country music for many years once explained how different Toby's attitude was from singers in the past. In those days, country songs were mostly about heartache and longing, not about bragging. They often told stories about lonely people sitting in bars, missing someone they loved. This person believed it would be hard to picture Toby Keith singing a tender, sad song, begging a woman to come back. Toby's style was more about strength and confidence, singing about making it through hard times without falling apart. These differences in personality and musical style kept George and Toby from becoming close. Things became even more strained when Toby once talked about George Jones in an interview. Toby had always respected George's music because he grew up listening to it with his father, who owned several of George's records. Toby often mentioned how much he admired George's songs, especially one called "The Race Is On." He admitted that George's music had helped shape his own love for country music. But during that same conversation, Toby made a light joke about George's nickname, No Show Jones. This nickname came from the times when George, struggling with drinking problems, would miss his own concerts. Toby found it a little amusing that George would sometimes drink too much and skip a show. Some people might have thought it was just a harmless joke, but for someone like George Jones, who had fought many personal battles, it probably didn't feel so funny. George had faced a lot of struggles in his life. He dealt with drinking problems, medication use, and stormy relationships, including a very public marriage to another country music star, Tammy Wynette. Despite all those troubles, George managed to keep making music that connected with people in a powerful, emotional way. He became one of the rare artists to have #1 hits in 5 different decades, something very few musicians have achieved. Toby Keith respected George's career even if he once joked about it. He even admitted that it would be hard for him to work as hard as George did for so many years. Toby saw George as a legend in country music history, but it was clear that their styles, beliefs, and personalities were worlds apart. Country music itself was also changing during this time. When Toby Keith was becoming famous, country music was beginning to mix with pop and hip-hop influences. It was not unusual anymore to see artists like Tim McGraw working with rap stars like Nelly. Meanwhile, radio stations started playing less of George Jones's songs. Some people were excited about these changes, believing it made country music more fun and modern. But others, like George, felt that the heart of country music was being lost.
That someday it would end. Get up and go outside. Don't let the old man in.
Even though George Jones was respected for everything he had done for country music and for helping younger singers, he struggled to understand or accept the direction the genre was taking. He was rooted in a different time, a time when country songs were soft, emotional, and humble. And Toby Keith's loud, defiant image just didn't fit into that world. Many might think that these aren't enough reasons for his dislike, but that's left for George. The next on this list is his very friend. Why did George dislike him? What prompted this shift in friendship? Stay with us. Number 3, Waylon Jennings. Across the long and colorful history of country music, many stories have been told about friendships, rivalries, and surprising moments between singers. One such interesting story is about George Jones and Waylon Jennings, two unforgettable stars who each had bold, larger-than-life personalities. Though both men shared a deep love for music and a wild way of living, their strong personalities often clashed. Over time, it became clear that George and Waylon did not always agree, and one unforgettable evening showed just how different they truly were. Waylon Jennings had his own very different path into country music. In the beginning, Waylon balanced a job as a radio DJ while chasing his dream of becoming a singer. From the very start, Waylon was not someone who followed the rules. He liked doing things his way, whether it was choosing which songs to sing or how to make his album sound. Waylon became a leader in a new kind of country music called outlaw country, which mixed the old country style with the boldness and energy of rock and roll. Waylon's early career wasn't easy. He had to work at different radio stations, sing in small clubs, and put out songs that didn't always connect with audiences. His music blended country, rock, and folk, and not everyone was ready to accept that. At one point, Waylon was even fired for playing too many Little Richard songs in a row, but he refused to give up. Songs like 4 Strong Winds and Just to Satisfy You started getting attention in his hometown of Phoenix. Slowly, his music gained fans and caught the interest of important people in Nashville. One day, a country singer named Bobby Bare heard one of Waylon's songs on the radio and was so impressed that he called Chet Atkins at RCA Victor to recommend him. Thanks to that call, Waylon got a recording deal in Nashville and began a new chapter in his career. But even with big opportunities in front of him, Waylon stayed independent. He wanted to make music his own way, and that stubborn streak often led to disagreements with traditional country stars like George Jones. George Jones was one of the most loved voices in country music. His songs spoke about heartbreak, hard times, simple joys, and honest stories from everyday life. George believed that country music should be filled with real feelings sung by people who had lived those experiences. He didn't care about fame or money as much as he cared about the truth in a song. To him, the simple, tender ballads of old country music were priceless. George and Waylon were never close friends. Both were independent, headstrong men with fiery tempers, and their personalities often clashed. The biggest sign of how different they were came on a wild night that neither would ever forget. It all started when George, already drinking heavily, decided on a whim to visit Waylon's house. At the same time, Waylon hadn't slept in several days, caught up in the exhausting, non-stop lifestyle many country stars lived during those times. When George arrived, he was so drunk that he didn't even recognize Waylon. The mood quickly turned dangerous because George was out of control, and Waylon was too worn out to deal with it properly. George began knocking things over and causing a mess in Waylon's house. It didn't take long before Waylon had no choice but to step in and stop him. In a shocking scene, Waylon had to physically wrestle George to keep him from destroying the place. It was a strange sight, 2 famous country singers wrestling in a living room. Waylon later thought it was both strange and funny that he had to sit on one of his musical heroes to calm him down. But things didn't end there. As soon as Waylon let George go, George punched him square in the face. The scuffle got worse when George broke someone's thumb, forcing Waylon to tie him up with a belt to keep him from causing more trouble. Surprisingly, in the wild world of country music back then, moments like this weren't so rare. Both men struggled with drinking and medication problems, and their tempers often flared. Fights, wild parties, and chaotic nights happened more than people knew. This fight was more than just a wild incident. It revealed the deep differences between them. George Jones grew up in a time when country music was about gentle, emotional songs and honest storytelling. Waylon Jennings came from a new wave of singers who wanted to change the old rules and blend country with other kinds of music. Waylon was a rebel, refusing to follow anyone else's expectations, while George held tightly to the old ways of country music that he loved so much. Their ideas about music and life clashed often. George thought Waylon was part of a group of musicians who were changing country music too much in ways he didn't like. On the other hand, Waylon saw George as stuck in the past, unable to accept that music needed to grow and change. Even though both men admired each other's talent, their personalities and beliefs kept them from becoming close. As time passed, both men looked back on that crazy night with a mix of humor and memory. It became one of those wild stories from the old days of country music that people would tell for years. A funny, strange reminder of how wild life on the road could be. In later interviews, Waylon would sometimes laugh about it, saying it was just how things were back then. George, too, would chuckle about it, remembering how both of them were wild men in their own way. George Jones and Waylon Jennings were two very different country music legends with very different dreams and ideas. That one unforgettable night showed just how opposite they really were. But both left a mark on country music in their own way. George stuck with traditional songs full of emotion and pain, while Waylon broke rules and mixed country with rock and other sounds. Their music was different, their personalities clashed, but they both loved country music in their own way. And in the end, country music was richer because of both of them.
He promised, heard what's living today. Oh, but she never.
Number 2. Billy Ray Cyrus. In 1992, a young and lively singer named Billy Ray Cyrus arrived on the scene with a surprise hit. His song, Achy Breaky Heart, was fun, upbeat, and perfect for dancing. It was very different from what George believed country music should sound like. Instead of being emotional and serious, Billy Ray's song was cheerful, playful, and quickly caught on with fans all over the world. When Achy Breaky Heart was released, it shot straight to the top of the charts. It wasn't just a hit in country music, it also reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song became a huge favorite, not just in the United States, but also in other countries like Australia and the United Kingdom. Its music video made line dancing incredibly popular, and soon people everywhere were learning the dance moves and joining in the fun. Billy Ray's first album, Some Gave All, was a huge hit. It went straight to number 1 on both the Billboard Top Country Albums chart and the Billboard 200. The album produced 4 hit singles, with Achy Breaky Heart as the biggest success. Some Gave All sold over 20 million copies around the world, making it one of the most successful country music debuts ever. But George Jones wasn't happy about any of it. In fact, it troubled him. He felt that Achy Breaky Heart and Billy Ray's fun-loving style didn't respect the deep roots of country music. George believed songs like this took attention away from the real, honest feelings country music was meant to share. Stories about life's hard times, love, and heartbreak. He didn't like how quickly this kind of music took over radio stations, and he spoke out about it. Even though George didn't like the music, he didn't personally dislike Billy Ray. George had a long history of encouraging younger singers and giving them opportunities, but he found Billy Ray's style, especially Achy Breaky Heart, to be shallow and lacking in originality. He worried that if country music followed this new direction, it would lose its soul and stop speaking to the everyday person's heart. As time went by, Billy Ray's music changed. He began mixing country sounds with pop and other new styles. Some of his albums included bluegrass songs, slow ballads, and even collaborations with artists from different kinds of music, including rap and pop. Later, Billy Ray would work with rapper Lil Nas X on the song Old Town Road, which mixed country themes with modern beats. This new sound connected with younger listeners, but it was far from the old-school country that George loved. Billy Ray kept making albums after his first big success. His second album, It Won't Be the Last, also started at number 1 on the country charts. It included popular songs like In the Heart of a Woman, which reached the top 3. While his later albums did well, none of them reached the same heights as his debut. In 1996, Billy Ray's album Trail of Tears was praised by music critics, but it didn't do well on the charts. His later singles struggled to make it into the top 40. Eventually, Billy Ray shifted his focus to acting and began making Christian music. Still, Even as his career changed, he was always remembered for Achy Breaky Heart, the song that first made him famous. Through all of this, George Jones stayed strong as a symbol of classic country music. While new artists and changing styles came and went, George never left the sound he believed in. His songs remained about heartache, family, love, and salvation. Through every album he made, George told stories that touched people's hearts. His powerful voice expressed deep feelings that listeners could feel in their bones. George watched country music change, and though he wasn't against progress, he disliked anything that took away the honesty and meaning from the music he cherished. George didn't dislike Achy Breaky Heart because of its upbeat tune or simple lyrics. His problem was that it lacked any real message. To him, the song didn't talk about life's big moments, the joy, pain, loss, or healing. It was just a light, catchy dance song with no emotional depth. Watching a song like that become such a huge hit made George feel like country music was drifting too far from its roots. Over the years, Billy Ray released different versions of Achy Breaky Heart, including Achy Breaky 2, which added rap sounds to the country style. To traditionalists like George, this was a clear sign of how modern country music had strayed from its old ways. Each time the song was brought back, it reminded George of everything about the new country music scene that he didn't like. Now you might think number one is his ex-wife, due to their bad relationship. Well, think again. The number one is what you would have never guessed. Who is this? Let's find out. Number one, Garth Brooks. In the late 1980s, a lively newcomer named Garth Brooks appeared in the country music world. His first album, released in 1989 with his own name, mixed old country sounds with pop, rock, and honky-tonk. This special mix helped his album climb to number 2 on the Top Country Albums chart and number 13 on the Billboard 200. It was a big deal for a country singer back then. Garth won many hearts with his early songs like Much Too Young, To Feel This Damn Old, If Tomorrow Never Comes, and The Dance. These songs were modern, catchy, and reached a wide audience. Garth became known for his lively shows, where he moved around the stage with the energy of a rock star, not a quiet country singer. His concerts were big, bright, and exciting, filled with colorful lights and grand performances. Many people thought Garth Brooks was good for country music. He drew in new listeners and kept country music popular in a changing world. But George Jones didn't see it that way. To George, this new kind of country music was drifting too far from what made the genre special. As the 1990s arrived, Garth Brooks became even more successful. When his third album, Rope in the Wind, came out in 1991, it already had 4 million orders before it was even released. The album made history by becoming the first country album to start at number 1 on the Billboard 200 chart. With a mix of country pop, honky-tonk, and even a cover of Billy Joel's Shameless, this album reached people who usually didn't listen to country music at all. Garth's rising fame put country music at the center of popular culture in a way it had never been before. At one point, Garth had 3 albums in the top 20 of the Billboard 200 at the same time, a rare achievement for a country artist. But even with all the excitement from the music world and many fans, George Jones wasn't impressed. George had never been shy about his opinions. He often spoke up about his worries over country music becoming too commercial. He believed singers like Garth Brooks were changing the music too much, turning it into something too polished, too pop-influenced, and too focused on making money. In George's eyes, country music was supposed to be honest, telling stories about real people and real feelings. All the bright lights and fame didn't mean much to him. Their disagreement wasn't personal. Garth Brooks actually had great respect for George Jones. Working together in the studio was a big, emotional experience for Garth. He admitted it was tough to sing next to someone he had admired for so long. To Garth, George wasn't just a singer. He was the heart of true, old-fashioned country music. Even with those moments of shared respect, it was clear that their ideas about music were very different. Garth understood that George had his own way of seeing country music. George preferred sad ballads about heartbreak, sung in a way that made listeners feel every word. Garth, however, leaned toward brighter, hopeful songs made to lift people up in giant concert halls, not quiet little bars. As Garth's career grew, his albums sold in huge numbers. When Fresh Horses was released in 1995, it quickly sold over 3 million copies. His shows filled giant stadiums, and his songs stayed at the top of country music charts. Garth liked trying new things, covering songs like Aerosmith's The Fever and mixing rock sounds into his own music. For younger fans, Garth Brooks became the face of modern country music. George Jones, though, felt uneasy about where country music was going. He believed too many songs were becoming slick and ordinary, made only to please big audiences. George thought true country music should make people feel deep emotions and connect to real-life stories. He worried that fame and money were becoming more important than heartfelt music, and he feared the soul of country music was getting lost under pretty sounds and empty words. Despite their differences, Garth Brooks always spoke kindly about George Jones. He deeply valued the older singers who built country music into what it was. Garth knew that while he liked putting excitement and fireworks into his concerts, the true foundation of country music came from simple, honest songs written by artists like George. In their own way, both men loved country music. George Jones held tight to the tender, honest traditions of old country songs, while Garth Brooks added fresh energy to entertain younger fans. Their disagreement was about where country music should go, finding a balance between new ideas and staying loyal to its heartfelt roots. Today, both men's influence is still seen in country music. The genre keeps both kinds of songs alive, the tearful ballads that sound like George Jones, and the high-energy, show-stopping concerts made famous by Garth Brooks. Their different styles remind us that while music always changes, the love people have for it, in all its forms, never goes away. What do you think about George Jones's rivalries? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more celebrity gist. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.